What's up, Raptors fans? Welcome to the Warriors Report. As you see here, we have a special guest, Robert. Thank you for being here. I'll let you introduce yourself, Robert.
Yeah, my name is Robert Mishovich. I just started the Pensari Basketball YouTube channel over on YouTube, so you can go check that out. And I'm happy to be here for the second time with you, Prob.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. So I'll link Robert's new channel down in the comment section below. So let's get into the hot debate. So Robert posted this online in a Raptors group, and he asked, would Pascal Siakam be the number one option on a lot of teams in the NBA? And I had to really sit down and think about this. And I called out to Robert and I said, hey, come on my channel. We want to debate this. So these are some of the list of teams for guaranteed that I think Pascal should be the number one option. I'll give you a maybe option as well. So for sure, I have the Cavs, Hornets, Pacers, Magic, Pistons, Oklahoma City Thunder, the Spurs, Timberwolves, Rockets, and then the maybe he could be potentially a first option are the 76ers and the Knicks. So Robert, I'm gonna ask you for your opinion. Let's dig right into this. So
I'm shocked. I'm shocked. As you saw in the comments, a lot of people listed out 3, 4, 5 teams. And a lot of the teams that they listed out were teams that are clearly in tank mode, rebuilding teams that would probably not feature a guy like Siakam, who's 27 years old. But obviously, you have taken it a step further, not just listing those 4 teams, 5 teams, like the Pistons, like the Cavs, but you've actually gone and listed teams like the Pacers, like the Sixers in your maybes, right? And those teams, I would argue that is just, there's no debate. So, I mean, we're going to debate about something where I think there's no debates. This should probably be an interesting topic, but I'm curious to understand how you see him as a better first option than someone like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Karl-Anthony Towns or Lamelo Ball. Shit, even I don't have the numbers on Mikal Bridges, but he's been amazing this year. So even someone like Mikal Bridges or Arvydas Sabonis' son, Domantas Sabonis, I think these are the numbers would show you that it's not really that close. It's not even, you're not splitting hairs between these two players. They're classes apart. So,
okay, well,
yeah.
let's start with Lamelo. Let's start with the Hornets. Now, you don't think Pascal is a number one option over Lamelo Ball? Lamelo is a pass first guard, and although he is very talented, I'm not ignoring his talents. I definitely think if you wanted one of those players to get you a basket, I think Pascal Siakam is a better player, and you would absolutely, in terms of scoring wise, we're not talking overall. Lamelo's still got a very bright future, but in terms of someone you need to get you a basket, I'm putting Pascal Siakam over Lamelo Ball.
Okay, so you, first of all, I want to preface this to everyone listening to just say Lamelo Ball is 20 years old. Okay, he is in his second season. So I want to compare Lamelo Ball so far this season to Pascal Siakam last season. Okay, it's not exactly a completely fair comparison to compare 11 games to a full season, but Pascal Siakam wasn't completely healthy last season. So let's compare it. So you say he's a pass first point guard. Per 100 possessions, Lamelo Ball scores 29.5 points per game. Okay, Pascal Siakam scores 28.9.
Okay,
so your pass first point guard scores more than your power forward, who is a first option. Okay. Secondly, Lamelo Ball is doing a lot more with less, right? Siakam had the last full season. He had Lowry. He had OG. There's a lot of talent. Fred VanVleet. Lamelo was doing this and is currently doing this on, I would argue, probably a worse team. He's the reason they're a better team, if there's ever an argument. The PER, PER is a stat that considerably favors bigger players because it overvalues rebounds. Lamelo Ball has a 21.7 PER. Pascal Siakam had a 17.7 PER. Win shares, which is an estimate of the wins added. Lamelo, 13.8 win shares per 48 minutes. Pascal Siakam, 0.138 win shares per 48. Pascal, 0.10. And then box plus minus, again, a player's impact. Lamelo, 4.1. Pascal Siakam, 0.4, literally the inverse of that. I don't think it's particularly close. The true shooting percentage is also in Lamelo's favor because he's just much better three-point shooter. So again, I don't think this is even close. I think the fact that they are 7 years apart in age and just the gravity. I mean, I was watching a video of I was reading an article, I believe it was Bleacher Report. They're talking about the top 25 players under 25. Lamelo was number 3 on that. You think that they're going to compromise what they deem to be a superstar talent on his way up to give touches to Pascal Siakam? I don't think so.
Okay, Robert. Here's the topic on hand. It's although I'm not denying that Lamelo Ball is an absolutely fabulous player. The topic at hand is the number one scoring option. It's not who's the better player. And obviously, last season you could debate. The Raptors had an awful season. A lot of players did. A lot of players did. There was injuries. There were COVID protocols, and I'm not sure about the Hornets if they had to deal with the same injuries.
No,
So
the topic on hand is number one option, not
number one option.
necessarily number one scoring option. So it's basically who do you run your offense through?
Mhm.
So being a better passer and being a better scorer are
Mhm.
both things that I would argue lend themselves to being a better first option. That's why Kawhi is a better first option than
Mhm.
Tim Duncan late in his career, because Kawhi was just a better offensive player late in his career, and that's why he became the first option for the Spurs. So if you're going to make an argument that Pascal Siakam is a better first option than LaMelo Ball, you would
Mhm.
have to argue that he's either a more effective scorer or a more effective playmaker, and he is neither.
Okay,
That's my point.
well, here's the thing, Robert. Let me throw some stats out since we're talking about stats.
Sure.
Pascal Siakam last season, 21 points, 7 rebounds, 4.5 assists. The only other players in the NBA, there were only 9 other players in the NBA that gave you those stats. And I'll let you guess some of them: Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Karl-Anthony Towns was actually one of those players who we're going to talk about soon. But there's a few other guys on that list as well who I'm forgetting at the moment. But that is some elite company.
Are you conveniently forgetting Russell Westbrook?
That's who I was forgetting, exactly. Russell Westbrook as well. So that's who I was forgetting. But the thing with Pascal Siakam, when we talk about number one option, is he's not just scoring; he's doing a lot of other things as well. We're playing a lot of transition. I think if we were to put Lamelo and Pascal Siakam on both teams, it's obviously Lamelo Ball is going to dribble the ball because he's the point guard. But if you're looking for a basket, I think that's Pascal Siakam.
Okay, so one of the things that Nick Nurse has addressed this season in several of his pressers is that the Raptors and we as fans should no longer look at points, rebounds, and assists. Rather, we should look at them in the context of per possession. Okay, so we want to look at points per possession, points per 75 possessions or 100 possessions. So the way the Raptors rank is per 75 possessions. You could argue that 100 possessions is just a progression of that. So per that number, which is adjusted for pace, right? Because if you look at it, someone like Kobe Bryant averaged 34 points in a season where he didn't win MVP in one of the lowest scoring seasons in NBA history. So you could argue that that's the greatest scoring season ever, even though James Harden scored more later in his career because the offense picked up. If there are more possessions, there are more places to score. Obviously, if you're going to take more shots, you have more places to score. So I don't think that a player should be penalized for taking fewer shots and generating more points. That's actually a sign that the player is more effective. LaMelo Ball has as high a usage as Pascal Siakam, and he generates more points and more assists out of those, and he generates more wins. So I don't know how you can make it. I don't know how you have a foot to stand on in this argument by just saying, well, he averaged 27 points, 7 rebounds. 7 rebounds has nothing to do with being a first option, because Karl-Anthony Towns, when we get to Karl-Anthony Towns, I'm going to talk about he's twice the rebounder Siakam is, has nothing to do with him being a first option. Because if that was the case, Andre Drummond would be a great first option, which he's not.
But Andre Drummond's also not scoring 20 points and giving you 5 assists. So
he does sometimes. I mean, for the Pistons, per 100 possessions, he was giving you over 20 and 20. The Pistons still decided to move on from him because that's not the point of basketball.
But Robert, here's the point, though. If you're making that same debate for Andre Drummond's giving you per this for 100, then that kind of throws out that debate of the per 100 possessions, does it not? Because if Andre Drummond looks as good per 100 possessions, then you can make, again, this is not to disrespect LaMelo. He's a great player, but you can make that same argument about, maybe let's look at Chris Boucher's per 100. Maybe he looks better than Pascal because he's put up a lot of stats in the limited times. I think, again, I'm not making that argument that LaMelo does not have a positive impact on a team. I just think Pascal Siakam is the more...
where Chris Boucher, it's hard to compare someone like Chris Boucher to Pascal Siakam because their roles on offense are so different. And so anyone who says that Chris Boucher can, for instance, he is not a positive defender, regardless of the blocks.
Right.
So immediately that puts you out. Number two, you're not comparing apples and apples when you're comparing Chris Boucher and Pascal Siakam, because one of them is a first option in the Raptors offense, and one of them is a rim runner. So obviously, you're going to have certain guys who bloat their stats because of the role that they play on offense, right? So one of the things that Second Spectrum does with the NBA, and what advanced scouts and people who are intelligent and coaches in the NBA, what they do is they will look at how difficult are the shots you're making, and how efficiently are you making them. And so Pascal Siakam generates a lot of bad shots, and he makes a lot of bad shots. You could argue that a first option that creates a lot of bad shots is probably not a first option. Chris Boucher, if put in the position that Pascal Siakam is, would be a worse player than Pascal Siakam, because he doesn't have the skill set. He's not a passer. He's not a dribbler. He really can't do what Pascal Siakam does. And Pascal Siakam in Chris Boucher's role would be so much better, right? But that's kind of the point. When we're comparing Lamelo to Pascal, we are talking about two players who are in the same position, primary initiators. And therefore, the apples to apples comparison is a lot more apt, is what I'm saying. So again, you're not really addressing my point. My point is Lamelo creates more assists, more wins, more points as a 20-year-old in the same 100 possessions as Pascal Siakam does.
Well, I do have another argument. You do make some good points
at a higher true shooting percentage. So that's the point about when you said about Andre Drummond. Drummond's points come at a low efficiency because his true shooting percentage, as your viewers may know, true shooting accounts for 3-point shooting. So the 3-point shooting is valued above 2-point shooting in true shooting percentage, which is why true shooting percentage sometimes is very different than what someone's field goal percentage is. Someone like Dwight Powell, right? He doesn't shoot threes. So his percentage is going to be really high because he's a rim runner. DeAndre Jordan, that's another guy who just gets all of his buckets off of rim runs. But with Pascal Siakam and LaMelo Ball, you are talking about primary initiators who get a lot of offense off of unassisted baskets, right? So we are comparing apples and apples. And the fact that a 20-year-old is more efficient than a 26-year-old max player is very promising for the former and very depressing for the latter.
Okay. Well, I'll make this one little argument before we move on to other players we have to cover as well. You obviously made some great points. Not disagreeing with you there. But if you're talking about LaMelo and Pascal, here's the thing. You switched those two players. Now, you talked about how LaMelo doesn't have the same teammates that Pascal does, but he's having a bigger impact. Then you can make that same argument that Pascal Siakam being on a bad team like the Hornets, and we're speaking last season, the Hornets last season, he's going to have a bigger impact because when he's on the Raptors, he's having to share the ball, which is not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. I know the point you're going to make is that, well, he's got good players who can make shots around him. But if you put Pascal on the Hornets, is he going to have a bigger impact than he would on the Raptors?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because he would actually be struggling more with their spacing, and you'll see it this year because this year's team, his supporting cast, has less spacing with Barnes, a non-shooter, replacing Lowry, a shooter. You're going to see Pascal Siakam struggle to create space even more. The good thing is every player that I'm going to argue for here would benefit from better teammates. This is why LeBron is always chasing after two all-stars to play with, because good players actually thrive in systems with other good players. So if you want to make a point that LaMelo Ball would be worse on the Raptors, I completely disagree. I think he would be so much better on the Raptors because he would have better spacing around him. I'm not even saying Gordon Hayward is a bad spacer. He is. He's just so often injured. And, his team, again, last year, they just weren't a great team, but he was a rookie, right? He impacted winning in such a great way. So I think a guy like LaMelo Ball, who creates so much downhill gravity, and someone who is such a very good passer, right? Even like guys like Damian Lillard, guys like this, Trae Young, there are a lot of players out there where, as you'll see, that as their teammates get better, they get better and their team gets better all over. So these are guys who play well off their team. Siakam would probably benefit from better teammates as well because it would create more spacing for him. So this is sort of the argument that we're making here is he a first option? Because LaMelo is showing that the Hornets can build around him, and Siakam is showing that the Raptors cannot. That's kind of the point.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. We do have some other players to talk about it as well. Now, another player you wanted to talk about was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and you can make that argument again. I'm going to make that argument without talking about stats because Pascal Siakam, yes, he had a tough season last year, and this is something I actually forgot to mention in my last argument. We're talking about Pascal Siakam having a really rough season, and he's still putting up these stats and still having the impact, regardless of how you feel about him. And if we're to compare Pascal Siakam in a good season, again, I'm not making excuses for Pascal. Yes, he had a terrible season. yes, he's responsible for some of his, faults on the offensive side. Obviously, COVID is not one of them. Injuries are not one of them. But if you're talking about Pascal Siakam at his best and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on his best, who is the number one option?
It's not even close, man. It's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You realize Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the games he played last year, do you realize the Oklahoma City Thunder, that terrible team, he was so good that they were a 500 team when in the games that he played? Do you realize that?
I did not know that, but that's...
Yeah, in the West, and they just sat him out because they were tanking for lottery balls. I don't think people understand how bad his teammates were and how good he was. But per 100 possessions, you don't want to talk about stats. I'll talk about stats. 33.4 points per 100 possessions, 8.3 assists, 62.3% true shooting, which is unheard of for a guard who is facing consistent double and triple teams. He is by far their best, second best, and third best player. He is so much better than their second best player. I don't even know who their second best player was last year. That's how bad it is. So Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just got a max contract from a very cheap organization because they understand apparently what a lot of people don't, which is just because you don't watch a player doesn't mean that they're not a superstar. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a super duper star. Okay. I mean, he's not often talked about in the same vein as Luka Doncic and guys like that, and he probably shouldn't be, but he's like right there. Like he's one of the top 5 players under 25 in the league. He's really good. So, and to make matters even better, on a team that barely even won, he averaged 0.143 win shares per 48 and a 21.6 PER as a guard. Unheard of. Again, and he's younger. So I don't think there's a GM on the planet at all that would put Shai Gilgeous-Alexander behind Pascal Siakam, even if they were the same age. So the fact that Shai Gilgeous is younger, it makes it even worse. Yeah.
All right, Robert, I got 2 arguments before I let you take over here. So you talked about them being a 500 team. What you left out was which teams they were playing in. Also, this was towards the end of the season. I don't know when they were 500. I clearly don't remember that. But
no. They were 500 in games he played.
Oh, in games he
played, they were 500. In games he did not play, they lost like everything. So he impacted winning in a way that Siakam simply didn't. So
okay, but look, Robert, here's the thing. There's no denying, as you said, some of these players we're talking about, they're really great players. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, of course, his team's going to be better with him than without him. They're a terrible team, and as you talked about, he's a really good player. There's no denying that. But one thing you forgot to mention here is the fact that we talk about stats and how he's scoring and this. I wouldn't call him a superstar just yet, because I'm going to make the same argument here as you can put up. He's a great player, don't get me wrong, but we can't make that argument that just because he's younger than Pascal Siakam means he's better. Because if we're talking about younger, then we should compare age. We should compare age.
I didn't say he's better because he's younger. I said he's better because he's better. I'm showing you box plus minus 3.8 versus 0.4.
Right.
You realize box plus minus, for all those fans out there who are like, what are these analytics? Box plus minus is the number that showed that Kyle Lowry, our greatest Raptor of all time, is the greatest Raptor of all time. Box plus minus consistently rated Kyle Lowry as a top 20 player, even though the league at the time was sleeping on the guy because he was averaging 15 points and 7 assists. And they're like, oh, and that's box plus minus is what made Kyle Lowry an all-star. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's numbers at a much younger age are very similar to Kyle Lowry. And honestly, peak Kyle Lowry is a much better player than Pascal Siakam.
Right.
So again, I'm just saying, I'm not arguing he's better because he's younger. I'm going to make that argument for guys like Cade and, guys like Cole-Anthony later on. I'm arguing he's better because he's better right now. It just so happens that it's even insulting that he's so much younger. That's my point.
Right. But if that's one of the points you're using, he's better. I disagree. But like you said, because when you mentioned all those points, you did say, and he's younger. Like, I do understand where you're coming from, but the point is that I also believe, I know this is going to be a little bit of a hot take. Obviously, this whole debate has been a really hot take, but players or teams have yet to discover him. Obviously, I'm not saying that they don't notice Oklahoma City's best player, but once teams figure out a strategy, we have to let some of these players go to the playoffs. That's the big argument I'm going to talk about here. Yes, you talk about Lamelo. Yes, you talk about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind they're going to be all-stars and great players and given their potential in this league. But we have to wait till the playoffs as well. That is one thing, because teams form a strategy. Because, look, Pascal did it when Kawhi was here. And then when as soon as Kawhi left, as great as Pascal was, we saw pre-bubble. We didn't get to see him in the playoffs last season, but teams really get to lock down on an offensive player and really set a strategy. And that is something we have not seen.
We've already seen Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the playoffs. We saw him in the playoffs as, I believe, a rookie with the
Chris Paul.
the Clippers.
Excuse me. Yes, you're right. Actually,
no, it wasn't with Chris Paul. It was when those Clippers. Remember the Clippers when they traded Shai Gilgeous for Paul George.
Yes,
you remember that trade?
Yes.
Okay, the Danilo Gallinari trade. So that year he was in the playoffs. He actually elevated his game from the playoffs from the regular season. There's nothing at all in his makeup, in his DNA, in his game that suggests he would not be a much better playoff player than he is a regular season player. He's a good shooter. He's honestly you said these are hot takes.
Yeah.
For an average NBA fan, I understand Raptor fans are overly consumed with Raptor basketball, so they're going to see guys like Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam. Every team in the league sees their players as better than other players, right, across the league, because you just see them more, right? Obviously, I think OG Anunoby is better than Matisse Thybulle. Sixers fans would not agree with me that they think, oh my God, Matisse Thybulle, he's 2 blocks, he's first team all defense. What's this OG Anunoby guy, right? I get it, but at the same time, if you are an NBA fan, I don't think, unless you're a Raptor fan or, if you asked non-Raptor, non-OKC fans, Shai Gilgeous or Pascal Siakam, not even close. Ask, and you said that the scouting report is not out on him yet. I'll argue right now, every single player who has played more than 30 games in the NBA has a scouting binder this thick. I've talked to professional scouts about this. Even right now, you heard it last night at the Philadelphia 76ers game. There were scouts, pro scouts from other teams that had come specifically to watch Scotty Barnes because they don't have a scouting report on this guy. No. He's a very young player who's developed a lot of new skills, and they need to figure out how to stop him. So even right now, even though the Raptors are not a contender, there's a young player who's making a lot of noise, and a lot of other teams don't have enough information about him. So they've sent pro scouts to the Sixers game to figure out what does this guy like to do. So if you're arguing that after 4 seasons that the rest of the league simply doesn't know how to stop Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, it's not because they don't have scouts in place to stop Shai. It's because he's just freaking unstoppable. He's a really good player.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I'll say about that.
Okay, so Robert, one thing I do want to clarify. I didn't say they didn't have a scouting report. I said they haven't formed a plan because they don't really need one. Oklahoma City Thunder are a downright terrible team. It's not the same as if you were playing the 76ers, for example, where you would need to double team Joel Embiid. It wouldn't be the same as some other teams because
he faces double teams every night.
Oh yeah, I'm not denying that, but teams like the Raptors or other great teams around the league aren't going to necessarily say we're going to triple team Shai Gilgeous-Alexander every possession because we need to stop him and that's how we're going to win the game. The game plan is going to be we're just simply going to beat Oklahoma City Thunder because we're the better team. Outside of Shai Gilgeous, I know they have some really good teams.
I just mentioned they were a 500 team with him. So obviously teams understand that they're a good team with him, right? So you can make that argument. You can make that argument. I wouldn't say they're a good team. But okay, just basically Shai Gilgeous-Alexander missed a lot of games last year. Kemba Walker was held out last season, okay? Right. And the Oklahoma City Thunder finished with just about the same win record as the Raptors. Okay, so if you're going to make the case that he was on a shit team and therefore we have to discount him, then you have to make the same case about Pascal Siakam because he was on the shit team too. But what you're going to say is Pascal Siakam missed a bunch of time, Kyle Lowry missed a bunch of time, and what I'm going to tell you is Oklahoma City Thunder were in the exact same position, but they were in a stronger conference, right? What I'm telling you is that with him in the lineup, they're a 500 team last year. So if that is the case, then you have to make a point that he is impacting winning in a way that I don't think you're giving him fair credit for. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I'm not. It's not that I'm not giving him credit. I think it's just the game plan is different when you're facing a really good team with a really good player and a team that's a lottery team that has a really good player.
Were the Raptors a really good team last year?
No, but that's again, you talked about it. You mentioned it just now. Kyle Lowry injuries. Late injuries. Norman Powell was probably one of the few players that wasn't injured or had COVID protocols. And at one point, we literally had Kyle Lowry, Norman Powell, and a bunch of G Leaguers in our starting lineup. That's how many injuries and COVID protocols we were dealing with.
Okay, well, Oklahoma City Thunder were in the exact same situation. It's just, except for Pascal Siakam, they had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And instead of Kyle Lowry missing time, they had Kemba Walker missing time. And instead of, OG Anunoby missing time with COVID protocol, they had Al Horford they just sent home. This is a team that was trying to deliberately lose. Okay. Yeah. The Raptors were not deliberately trying to lose until the very end. My point is, if you're going to make an argument for one side, you have to make it for the other side as well. So if you're going to say that, hey, we're going to discount what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did because he's not on a winning team and teams are not scouting him. Well, you have to say the same thing about Pascal Siakam. Pascal Siakam's not on a winning team, therefore teams are discounting him. But we're not making that argument for Pascal. We're only making it for Shai. I think personally, it's because people don't watch Thunder games. I do watch a lot of Thunder games. Huge Shai Gilgeous-Alexander fan.
Yeah.
Let us know in the comments if you're a big Shai Gilgeous-Alexander fan. I think that'll generate a ton of comments as a Canadian boy. But I think we'll just have to agree to disagree here. You think Pascal Siakam is better than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but I will put an asterisk here for age. You may think that age is irrelevant, but or not as relevant. But I will say that when franchises are evaluating their talent base, they will always prioritize a younger player who's equivalent to an older player, usually, unless that older player is a fading superstar. So there's a reason why the Hornets are running their offense through LaMelo Ball instead of Gordon Hayward. Gordon Hayward is a better player, you could argue, last year, but LaMelo Ball needs the reps because he's a 19-year-old superstar in the making. I would make the case that right now we're in the same similar situation with Scotty Barnes, except Scotty Barnes is a better player than LaMelo Ball long term. So
we'll leave it at that. I didn't actually say that the Raptors, or I should say that players would choose Pascal or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander because of the age, but obviously if you ask people, they would obviously choose Shai Gilgeous-Alexander because age is a big part of, him being who he is. And I do want to touch on one little point before we end this discussion. It seems like a very detailed discussion, but when you talked about him being in the playoffs with the Clippers, he was not the number one option, Robert. That's
true.
That's
100% true.
Yeah,
that's fair. And to be honest, the last time that Pascal Siakam was really successful in the playoffs, because I don't think you want to talk about the bubble. Do you want to talk about the bubble? I don't think you do. No. The last time Pascal Siakam was in the playoffs, he was the third or fourth option for the Raptors as well. So we can make a point that they played a similar role. Pascal was a much older player. Shai was a rookie, right? I believe he was a rookie for the Clippers that year.
Right.
So Pascal Siakam as a rookie was in the G League.
Yeah, that's fine. There's no argument. Yeah, of course. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at his age is way more skilled than Pascal was at his age. Yeah. All right, let's move on to some other players. So I'll let you choose the next player. Who do you want to talk about? You said
Sabonis. I think Sabonis is close because when I was doing a preseason breakdown for Basketball Zone with my boy Leo, we were talking about whether or not the Raptors would make a trade if they really wanted to move off Siakam for Sabonis, right? And the point was you wouldn't make that trade because Siakam's a better defender. But when it comes to winning on offense and running an offense through a guy, Sabonis is a better player for me. According to you, he's not a better player. I would just like to point out that he is 20.6 PER, 60% true shooting per 100. He's actually a less efficient. He's a less volume scorer, but he's a much better passer. So his box plus minus is 3.9, which is right around exactly where you'd expect a star. I want to say superstar because people throw that term around a lot. Giannis is a superstar. I think his box plus minus is like 9. But all-stars should have a box plus minus in the 3 to 5 range, and he's comfortably right in the middle of 3.9. He averages 0.15 win shares per 48, again, to Siakam's 0.110. So again, like it's like he's 1.5 times the player. But I think that the defensive potential of Siakam, and again, Sabonis is younger. He's 2 years younger. He's a better rebounder. He's a better post player. He's a better passer. There's not a lot that Siakam does better than him other than defend. That's the only advantage I would give to Siakam, and that's literally the only difference in the numbers. And Sabonis is not a bad post defender. I just think Siakam fills a very valuable player type, which is a big who can both drop and switch. I think that's a very important player type, and it's probably the only value I really see in Siakam at this point.
Right. All right, Robert, I'm going to throw one question at you because I feel like there's absolutely no argument here. Yes, Sabonis is better rebounder, passer, but if you're putting Pascal Siakam on the Pacers right now, replace him with Sabonis, Pacers are going to be a top 6 or 7 team. Right now, I believe they're not. I know it's early into the season. Pascal Siakam, put him along with Malcolm Brogdon, put him along with Turner, put him along with Karis LeVert. They have TJ Warren. They have their rookie Chris Duarte going off as well. That team is going to look solid with Pascal Siakam. I think they're better with Pascal Siakam than they would be with Sabonis. And you can make the argument the other way around as well. So
honestly, I think other than the Raptors, I don't even think he would be a first option over Malcolm Brogdon. I'm being straight up with you. Like you probably definitely don't agree with that. And that might be a hot take. That might be my first hot take. But really, at this point, you have to understand this is 2 years of serious struggling. Brian Windhorst was talking about on TSN Overdrive, where he was talking about Scotty Barnes' potential. And one of the questions he was asked was, hey, as an outsider who's outside Toronto, how do you guys see Siakam? And he said, he's not a first option. If he's your second or third best player, you're going to be good.
Yeah.
And the reason that people say that is because we've seen him for a first option for 2 years. We've also seen Malcolm Brogdon, Karis LeVert.
Wait, Robert, I'm going to stop you there. For 2 years, we've seen him for 1 year. And then
no, we've seen him for 2 years. It's been 2 years, man.
Sorry, it's been 2 years. You're right. Yeah. I thought you were including this season as well. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so basically we saw about, I mean, again, people point to the third team All NBA selection, but what people don't realize, and a lot of people carelessly forget, is that the award season after COVID was based on pre-stoppage. So really, because if you factor as an injury, I believe pre-stoppage, you only play 40 games. So, or 35 games. It was less because he got injured around close to the All-Star break. So, it's he got injured around the winter. So I just think that people really are basing a lot on projections. And I think that there's a lot of loyalty within this organization towards Pascal Siakam, just from Masai Ujiri being such a proponent of African basketball, from, maybe his association as a guy who was really big in terms of championship run.
Right.
I think he was probably the fourth most important player in that championship run. A lot of people like to overemphasized his value. He's a rim runner, dude. Like
another hot take, but
I mean, dude, people really like to sleep on the impact of Kawhi, Marc Gasol, and and Kyle Lowry. But if you think he was more impactful than those three players, you're not watching the same games, because we stopped Joel Embiid, Nikola Vucevic. We stopped the Bucks' entire offense with Marc Gasol. It wasn't Siakam only. Siakam was a part of it. So giving this guy a max contract on the basis, no one in the league, right, at the point that they gave him the max contract, would say he was worth a max contract at that point. What they would say is he might grow into a type of guy. And the Raptors have a history of rewarding guys with loyalty contracts. So they usually don't let guys hit restricted free agency. They think of it as a taking care of our players, because if a player enters their free agency season with that contract back of their head, they're always thinking, oh my God, I got to put up numbers this season. I got to hit free agent market. What if I get injured? So it's sort of a trust thing with the management when they sign a player early. And I think what you saw was, apart from a really hot October, November start, Pascal Siakam has been a really bad player for 2 years. And I think most teams in the league realize that, and they don't have the same association to this guy. He didn't lead them he wasn't part of their championship run. So if you just throw him into the Indiana Pacers, they're going to have the same sentiments you have about him, about Malcolm Brogdon and Karis LeVert and Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis. And honestly, if you want to talk about projections, the Indiana Pacers were projected to win more games this year than the Raptors. Okay, so straight up.
Hey, here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, Robert. If we're having projections, we're talking about projections now. They never really have the Raptors where they're supposed to be. We've seen this since last 8 years. But I do want to touch upon something you talked about there. Now, you talked about Malcolm Brogdon. We faced him in the playoffs in that championship run. And you do make some good points. I think Marc Gasol's contributions during that championship run just goes so underappreciated. He was a huge part of the Raptors. But again, that is debatable if Pascal was third or fourth. We'll leave that for the comment section. But I do want to touch upon some other things as well. Now, you talk about Pascal Siakam. I'm not arguing the fact that he is the number one or number two option. I don't think he's the number one option. I'm agreeing with you. But for the sake of the debate, we're talking about how many teams he would be the number one option on. Now, obviously, you feel differently about the Pacers. And look, I made my points. I think we should talk about some other players as well. And I think you want to talk about Karl-Anthony Towns. I think you're really big on.
Oh, okay. Karl-Anthony Towns, for those who do not watch the Minnesota Timberwolves, Karl-Anthony Towns is a generational one-way unicorn. So basically, he's underrated on defense. He's a better defender than people think he is. He's a great drop pick. He's a great drop big. He just doesn't have the mobility that Siakam, Precious Achiuwa, guys like this have, because he's just a huge human being. And so if you've actually watched Karl-Anthony Towns play, you'll realize that he's a bit of a lazy defender, where he sometimes takes plays off, where he makes bad reads. But that's defense. We're not talking about defense. We're talking about offense. And on offense, he is the greatest shooting center in NBA history. I will debate that till I'm blue in the face. He shoots over 40% from three. The numbers are absolutely out of this world. Okay. per 100 possessions, 35 points. Okay, 6.3 assists, 23.1 PER, on almost 62% true shooting, 4.3 box plus minus. I mean, we're talking about a one-way super duper star. Okay, we're talking about one of the top 10 players in the NBA.
At the moment,
honestly, if you ignore a little bit the team around him in terms of just sheer talent and a potential to be a gravitational big, yeah, he's huge. Out of the post, he's an automatic double team. Out of the pick and pop, he is an automatic bucket. I mean, honestly, as offensive superstars go, I mean, there are a lot of guys in the top 10 who get a lot of value for defense because they're two-way play. Guys like Ben Simmons, who are top 30 players, who get a lot of value for defense added. Guys like Paul George, guys like Kawhi Leonard, guys like, who am I thinking about here? Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? Joel Embiid. A lot of these guys get a lot of value. Karl-Anthony Towns is basically Joel Embiid without the defense. It is literally and a slightly better shooter. So you replace defense with shooting and a little bit more durability, and you get Karl-Anthony Towns. I know for a lot of people who've just watched the Timberwolves lose year after year, they're like, oh my God, they probably don't have a really, really good player. I don't think you understand how good this guy is until you watch him, unless you look at the stats and you look at the game film and just see how goddamn talented he is. He was a first overall pick for a reason. So I don't think there's any debate about that. I don't think if the Raptors could trade Siakam plus 3 picks for Towns, they would be so much better. There's no way in hell that I've seen a lot of Raptor fans throw out, oh, Karl-Anthony Towns for Siakam, that could be a cool deal. And it's like, you need 2 people to make a deal, dude. And there's no way in hell the Timberwolves would ever trade, or any GM would ever trade Karl-Anthony Towns for Siakam.
First of all, we are not throwing 3 picks and Pascal Siakam for Karl-Anthony Towns. I think we could get him for cheaper, but again, we'll leave that for another debate because this is about number 1 option. Now, actually, Robert, I do agree with you here that Karl-Anthony Towns offensively goes really underappreciated. I actually had to take a look at his 3-point percentage, and he was one of the few centers, or if not the only center in the league, where I believe he was making about 3-3-pointers a game while putting up 20 plus points, 11 plus rebounds. And as I mentioned, he's one of those guys like Pascal that's 27 and he's averaging 4.5 more assists per game. But he's a very talented player. But the thing with the NBA is how it's run. Now, I could argue, like, talent-wise, you could definitely say he's maybe, again, I'm not going 100% with you here, but you can maybe make that discussion for whether he's more talented than Pascal on the offensive side. Again, I know you're going to say Pascal has been struggling the last 2 seasons, but the thing with the NBA right now, how it's run, I want to make this argument with the Timberwolves because they do have some really good talented players, young players, but the argument I'm trying to make here is that offenses, besides maybe you could argue 2 or 3 centers around the league, is normally not run through centers. It's usually run through small forwards, power forwards. And that's why I think Pascal Siakam would be the number 1 option on the Timberwolves. I think if the Timberwolves, I know you got a lot to say, Robert. Hang in there just for a moment. If the Timberwolves, let's say Pascal Siakam, no trade involved. Let's say the Timberwolves had Pascal Siakam at the moment. I think the offense would be flowing through him and Karl-Anthony Towns. So it would be 1A, 1B, but I think Pascal would take that over Karl-Anthony Towns. Just because, listen, Robert, here's the thing. If you're running the offense through Karl-Anthony Towns, he can hit 3-pointers, yes, but majority of his game is close to the rim or within close to the rim. You can't have Pascal standing at that 3-point line. So I think if you're running the Timberwolves offense, you're having Pascal facilitate, and you can have Karl-Anthony Towns work around. That's the argument I'm trying to make here. So,
okay, this might sound like a hot take to you. I think Pascal Siakam will be the 4th option on the Minnesota Timberwolves right now, and I'll tell you why. Now, you're shaking your head, but just as I was shaking my head when you were talking, it seems like we just do not see this team correctly or at the same time. First of all, Karl-Anthony Towns is definitively the first option on that team, and he is the franchise player for that team. They have bent over backwards. They traded Andrew Wiggins plus picks, which cost them this year because they had to give up that pick to the Warriors, which became Jonathan Kuminga, number 7 in a pretty stacked draft. And they gave up that player plus pick for in my opinion, probably an inferior player, because Andrew Wiggins has really turned it around with the Golden State Warriors. And they did that because they wanted to please Karl-Anthony Towns. And Karl-Anthony Towns was pleased because D'Angelo Russell, again, a very, very talented offensive player, was coming back in that trade. And that was what kept him around. And then they invested a 1st overall pick in Anthony Edwards, who is a slightly inefficient, but extremely high level scorer. And he's got a ton of potential. Again, another 20-year-old. I don't think there's a chance in hell that if they made a trade, if you the argument we were making was if you could just take Pascal Siakam off this team, buy him out, and literally plop him on another team, where would he rank? It's not, how would he rank in place of Karl-Anthony Towns? Because if you remove Karl-Anthony Towns, everything changes for that team. No, if you just plant Pascal Siakam on that team and say, here's an extra guy, he's not going to be a top 3 option on that team. They would not compromise. They would not compromise Anthony Edwards' development, even though Siakam's a better player than Edwards. They wouldn't compromise Karl-Anthony Towns' just locker room presence, because obviously I think Siakam's a better player than D'Angelo Russell, just by a hair, but still I think he's better. Just by I agree with you.
I would say by quite a bit.
Dude, D'Angelo Russell was an all-star, dude. He's a max player.
So Pascal Siakam was as well. Pascal Siakam, what did he score? 30 plus points in game 1 against Draymond Green, one of the better defenders at that time in the league.
30 points per game?
No, he scored, I said 30 plus points in one of the games in first game of the NBA Finals.
Yes. It was the highest scoring percentage ever, but I want you to really go back, if you're a Raptor fan, go watch that game and see how wide open most of those shots were. They were wide open. Look, every defense is geared to stop certain things and give up certain things. You see this in the Raptors offense every single night. We give up corner three to limit penetration. The Sixers, the Warriors really had one game plan that game, or the entire series, which was to stop Kawhi Leonard. And they did a pretty successful job of that. But what happened is other guys got going. Siakam got going one game. Fred VanVleet had a huge game. Lowry had a huge game. So this is a calculated gamble. It doesn't mean that Kyle Lowry is suddenly a 35-point per game scorer. It doesn't mean Fred VanVleet is the greatest shooter on the planet, and it doesn't mean that Siakam is a 30-point per game scorer.
That wasn't the argument I was making. I was saying he's done it at the highest stage, and don't get me wrong, Karl-Anthony Towns is a very talented player. But what has he done? What has he done in this league? Is you can make that argument, and you can make the argument. What have the Raptors done without Kawhi Leonard? But
what had Michael Jordan done 3 years into his career?
Right? What has he done his entire career? So that's the thing. He hasn't played 3 years. But if Michael Jordan had been in the league right now and he'd been playing 3 years, then we can make that argument. But we're taking a look at the player's entire career, not just 3 years.
But we have to be fair about this, right? You cannot make an argument that the Raptors were a playoff team because of Pascal Siakam, because we have advanced metrics that show that Marc Gasol and Kyle Lowry are a huge impact on winning. And what you saw last year was the first year in 2 years that we had without Gasol, without Serge Ibaka. Suddenly, when you replace these guys with an average center like Aaron Baines, everything goes to shit, right? So that's kind of the point that I'm making is like, if Karl-Anthony Towns is being asked to be the number 1 option on the Minnesota Timberwolves and they're struggling because they're number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 option, their coaching, everything is kind of slanted. Well, you got to make a point that, if Siakam was in the same position, it might be the same. But according to a lot of people last year, Lowry was still the leader of this team. And the year before, Gasol was still the primary initiator out of the post. So Siakam is going to get a lot of easy offense that, frankly, someone like Karl-Anthony Towns has to generate for himself in that offense. So I think that, honestly, this comes down to politics. I just don't think that that any other organization is going to compromise the development of a young player, especially a top 3 pick like Anthony Edwards, to appease a 27-year-old overpaid max player. I just don't think that they see the upside of that. The Raptors see the upside of that because they have to maintain his value as a max contract player. But I don't think other teams are going to see the sentimental rosiness, right? They don't give a shit.
But Robert, you can make that same argument for a lot of players. Like a rebuilding team wouldn't be looking to build their team around a 27-year-old. Let's use the Magic or Pistons, for example. You wouldn't be acquiring a 27-year-old to build around him because you're going to be rebuilding team for 4+ years, and that player is going to be out of his prime. So of course, if you're talking about a young team that's building, they're going to normally build around younger players. They're not going to build around someone who's heading towards his 30s. They're going to build someone who's heading towards their, 24, 25-year-olds, of course.
Well, but the upside element and development element is a really big part of the NBA, and we need to factor that in, right? So if we are the one team in the league out of 29 other teams that is choosing to build around a still developing 27-year-old on a max contract, then we have to understand, at the end of the day, in the playoffs, when it comes down to it, is my best player better than your best player? It almost always comes down to that, right? And can what my best player do be stopped by your defense? And can your defense stop what my best player? So it just comes down to that. So The Milwaukee Bucks could not stop Kawhi Leonard, right?
That's true.
But the Raptors found a way to stop Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's kind of what it comes down to. So what I'm saying is we have seen time and time again that Siakam as a featured guy is very easy to stop. I have never met a defense that could stop these guys one-on-one. You saw us defend Domantas Sabonis. We doubled him. You saw us defend Karl-Anthony Towns. We double him every time. You saw us defend Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
That's because we don't have a traditional big man, though. If we have Marc Gasol, then it's a different story. If we have Marc Gasol doubling, we don't need to double Domantas. If we have Mark, we don't need to double Karl-Anthony Towns. That's the thing. And I do want to, Robert, I know we're talking about this discussion. I do want to touch a little bit upon when you talk about having Marc Gasol. There's absolutely no doubt. I think Raptors fans really underappreciated not only that championship, but also how much of an impact Serge and Mark had. But that was also more of defense. Defense generates offense. So it wasn't so much more that Marc Gasol helped Pascal Siakam become that much better offensively. I think it's because their defense was there, and then it allowed them to stay competitive in that game. So again, we can make that.
I think it's both, because what Marc Gasol did on offense was two things. Number one, he was an excellent screener, right? So what he can do is that big to big screen. He can allow Siakam to pop up top, and when he sets the screen, unlike when someone like Boucher or Precious sets a screen, it's a real screen. Like, you feel it, and it frees you up. The second thing he does is he's a great post initiator. So he's a guy that you could literally facilitate the offense through in the post. Siakam, comes up the ball, dribbles it up, passes it to Marc Gasol in the post, and he can just see right over the defense. And he's so cerebral. He's going to make the right pass, usually to a cutter or an open shooter. So if you're catching those passes, they're right in the pocket. They're right on the move. There's such a component to that. I don't want to compare Marc Gasol to Nikola Jokic, because Jokic is literally the greatest passing big man of all time, just passing Arvydas Sabonis. But Gasol's probably a top 10 passing big man of all time. He's really underrated in that. So the combination of his defense, his switch ability and drop coverage, plus the fact that he's an excellent passer, great spacer, he always gets out of the way. That's what you realize. What you're seeing with the Raptors offense right now, when Scotty Barnes or OG Anunoby has a mismatch, you have Chris Boucher flashing in the post and demanding a post up, and that just cuts off the driving angle. What Gasol would do in that case, even though he struggled shooting with us so badly, is he would move his man out of the way and get him to the top so that he could clear it. There's such a cerebral process to it. I know a lot of people look at Jonas Valanciunas, and I'm a really big JV guy. He was one of my favorite players, but when you compare those two, it's not a comp. Right? It's not a really fair comparison, because you're talking about one guy who's just rebounds really well, scores really well, and the other guy who just thinks really well. And sometimes we don't always see thinking show up in the box score.
Right.
But thinking is important.
No, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So before we move on, you're putting Karl-Anthony Towns as a top 10 player in the league.
Offensive player. Top 10 offensive player. I personally don't like him. I mean, I'm not a big Karl-Anthony Towns guy. I don't like his defense. I don't like his attitude. I don't like his entitlement. I don't think he has winning habits. But in terms of offensive talents, there are not nine better players in the league offensively than him. He's basically like a 7-foot Steph Curry, dude.
Wait, so you're saying there's not 9 players in the NBA that are better than Karl-Anthony Towns?
Offensively,
yeah. Okay, so we have to talk about this. Luka, Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant, James Harden, that's 4. Giannis, you could make the argument. I'm not going to put Giannis because I know he relies a lot on attacking the basket. He relies a lot on LeBron James.
Not anymore.
What? Oh, Karl-Anthony Towns offensively. We're talking everything.
Fringy.
Passing.
It's fringy. It's fringy. The best ability is availability, and LeBron has been injured a lot. So fine, you can make the point that he's better offensively than Karl-Anthony Towns, of course, but you're still grasping at straws here. You have 5 guys. Yeah,
I'm not done. I'm not done. Kawhi Leonard, again, we're not including injuries, right? So Kawhi Leonard, come on, Robert, you cannot say Kawhi Leonard is not better, more talented than Karl-Anthony Towns offensively.
Dude, I think you're really sleeping on Karl-Anthony Towns.
No, I like Karl-Anthony Towns, but I don't know about this.
But seriously, like, I don't know how much you or your viewers have actually watched this guy play. Like, I hope that there's a Timberwolves fan that somehow stumbles onto this video who can like comment for 15 paragraphs about how good Cat is. But dude, offensively, you are literally talking about a guy who has gravity out to 35 feet away from the basket. This guy can launch from the logo, right? At a high level. He takes 8 threes a game. That's insane. Okay. And he's a post threat. I mean, honestly, he's a great passer. There's literally nothing he can't do. I'm telling you straight up. He's like, okay, I get it. Jokic is a better player. Luka is debatable. It's very debatable.
Luka Doncic, Luka and Cat. We're not having this discussion, Robbie. You're saying Luka is not as talented as Karl-Anthony Towns.
He's not a better offensive player.
Offensive. Yeah, no, of course. We're talking offense.
Dude, like Luka is in a heliocentric offense. He's extremely good, obviously going downhill, making reads, etc. He's a great playoff performer. I'm not debating any of that. But in terms of like, how do you stop a guy, right? There really isn't much you can do to stop Karl-Anthony Towns. I'm sorry. Like, I think it's closer than you think. I mean, I'm a Luka guy. He's one of my favorite players. I think it's close. Harden, it's close. It's close. I think Harden's one of the 50 greatest players of all time. I just think that, people just do not give enough respect to Karl-Anthony Towns, dude.
No.
I think whatever he gives you on offense, he costs you a lot of it on defense because of how NBA offenses exploit him in space, because they force him to cover out in the perimeter. He's very slow-footed. But dude, in terms of just straight up like efficient offense, you want to get a bucket. Like he's a bucket. Like we're talking a guy. Can you imagine a guy who takes 8 threes a game, shooting 62% true shooting? Like that's unheard of, right? It's literally unheard of. Like you can't. Luka doesn't shoot that percentage. Harden doesn't shoot that percentage. There are very few guys in the league that shoot that percentage. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I would say he's borderline top 10 offensive player. Okay, let's put it that way. I feel a little less confident now that you've brought up some of these names. I'm like, maybe he's just right on the border, but comfortably 100% I put him top 15 offensive player.
But you said there's no one that can stop Karl-Anthony Towns. There's literally no one that can stop Luka Doncic. Look at what he was doing to Paul George. Look at what he was doing to Kawhi Leonard.
That's true.
They were doing everything, and he was.
No. You're 100% right, and I think that's what people don't understand about the Raptors defense. And this is a really good discussion to get into at some point, because the Raptors defense does not care as much about primary defense as it does about switch defense and help defense. Because the notion here is analytically, when you look at second spectrum and you look at the data points and analytics, what defense is telling us is that very few players can stop any one player, NBA player, one-on-one. You
Right.
always get beat. So you just have to take your medicine, deal with it, and say, okay, I know that Karl-Anthony Towns is going to beat me in the post. How do I deal with the second defender? I know that Luka Doncic is going to beat me. And that's why I think that the Clippers have suffered in the playoffs, because they have banked on the fact that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are really good perimeter defenders, which they are. And Patrick Beverley is an above average perimeter defender. And none of them can stop Luka Doncic, because at the end of the day, the only thing that stops superstars is teams. You need a team to stop Giannis Antetokounmpo. Kawhi Leonard, for all the credit he gets as a defender for the Raptors, Marcus Gasol and Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet, all of these guys geared up the defensive schemes that Nick Nurse came up with to stop Giannis, to stop Joel. A lot of people will just look at it because it's kind of a casual way of looking at the game, because we're all people who've played basketball in our lives, and we play on the playground. And we're like, okay, I'm going to check this guy, and the guy's going off. Like, I'm going to defend him. And it's like, on a pro level, you can't stop a great offensive player. A guy like Kawhi Leonard cannot be stopped one-on-one, not by anybody, not by even the best defender, probably not even maybe Michael Jordan. But other than that, like, there's just nobody, not even Michael Jordan. There's nobody in the world who can stop Kawhi Leonard one-on-one. You need to send a second defender. So it's the same thing with Karl-Anthony Towns. But what I'm saying is Pascal Siakam has been stopped one-on-one by Jaylen Brown.
Well, that was also, look, I'm not going to make excuses for Pascal. That was also because he hadn't touched a basketball, he was saying, in 3 months, because he was also he was isolated in his home because of COVID. I don't know again where he was. I don't know if he was in Toronto.
He was in Toronto. He couldn't get the visa. He couldn't get the visa. And I think a lot of fans kind of heard that, and they were kind of shocked by it, because that wasn't the case for a lot of other NBA players. And I guess maybe what's unfair to Siakam is that a lot of people don't realize he's not an American citizen, right? Which is why he had the visa issue, right?
Yeah.
So that I understand. At the same time, a lot of people would say, well, his whole deal was he wanted to go to a gym like with Rico Hines, like what he usually does. And a lot of people would say, well, why don't you just go out to the playground, dude? Like, you're an NBA player, sure. Like, why don't you just go to the gym? And I think what we found out this year with Pascal Siakam, more of a personal note, is he had never been on a streetcar in Toronto before. This was his first year being on a streetcar. And I think that that's sort of indicative of just a personality thing, right? Like I know players who come into this team and literally like the first day they're all over Harborfront. Pascal Siakam still can't pronounce Spadina, right? So he can't. It's
Robert, come on. We're talking basketball talent, not his pronunciation. My pronunciation isn't the greatest, so I'm not going to get.
Oh no! It's not a language thing. It's literally he'd never really heard of Spadina.
Yeah,
and people were kind of shocked. He's like Spadina, and it's like he hasn't been around Toronto, which makes sense. So he, instead of okay, I couldn't get my visa. NBA season might start up, might not start up. I want to go to Rico Hines in LA, and so the choice is obvious. You're not getting your visa, go pick up a basketball and play in the gym in Toronto, right?
Well, the thing was, again, Robert, I don't know where you are. I don't know. I'm obviously in British Columbia here, but the government had locked down everything. I remember here in British Columbia, they had actually removed all the hoops and actually covered them. So again, I don't know how things were in Toronto. I'm not making excuses for him.
He's a professional athlete. He can have access to a gym if he wants it, right? Every I don't think I heard this from any other NBA player. So as much as we want to forgive it and say, okay, well, he couldn't get to the US where he wanted to go. He was still in Canada. He got stuck in Canada for whatever reason because of COVID. Okay, fine. Pick up a ball and dribble. I don't see the excuse. I think fans unjustly crucify him because there's sort of a notion that this guy got paid and then he slacked off. Right. There's another side to this, obviously, which is this is a human being that we're dealing with who might have gone through depression. I think we all dealt with the pandemic very differently. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, right, there is a case to be made to say, well, you signed a $35 million contract. You do have an obligation to your team to show up and he hasn't looked the same in 2 years, man. So it's hard to argue.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll leave it as it is. Let's get on to our last player here. I want to talk about Joel Embiid. And I put the 76ers as a maybe. Now, you had a big facepalm before we started recording, and you were about to walk off on here like it's, first take. But I want to make this argument. Now, the argument I want to make here is a maybe. Again, it's a maybe. I'm not saying it's a sure thing. He would be the first option on the 76ers. And the argument, I want to throw some stats here since we have been talking a little bit about stats. So, which obviously, you're saying Joel Embiid. I'm assuming you're saying Joel Embiid, right? Not Tobias Harris. When we're talking about first options on the 76ers?
I'm saying he would be a third option behind Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. 100%.
Wow, you do not like Pascal Siakam.
Dude, that's not a fair takeaway from that because there aren't a lot of teams in this league at all that would give up more for Siakam than they would for Ben Simmons even right now. I guarantee it.
All right, well, we'll ask you guys in the comment section, but I'm going to throw some stats here for you guys. So obviously, you feel some sort of way about that. Maybe you don't even think the 76ers should be under the maybe option for Pascal Siakam being a number one option. Now, Joel Embiid, here's the question. I want to throw it at you. You ask one of these guys to get you a bucket. And I'm not denying the fact that Joel Embiid is more dominant. I'm not saying that he is less dominant than Pascal Siakam. The one I want to talk about is unassisted field goals made. And now Pascal Siakam, 59.1% of his field goals. This is last season, not this season. Last season, 59.1% of his field goals were unassisted, whereas Joel Embiid, his was fairly close as well. Not too bad, 51.7. But I do want to dig deeper into this, Robert, before I give you the mic here. Just 1 second. So less than 5 feet, when you compare Pascal to Joel, unassisted field goals, 75% of Pascal's within 5 feet. Less than 5 feet, 75 of his field goals were unassisted, whereas Joel Embiid was 40%, considering that he's a big man who posts a lot. That was actually a surprising fact. 5 to 9 feet from the rim, Pascal Siakam, 75%. Joel Embiid, 50%. 10 to 14 feet, 50% for Pascal, 60% for Joel Embiid. So he's got that there. And then it's the paper's covered here, but 15 to 19 feet from the rim. If you're asking one of these players to get you a basket, Pascal Siakam, 66.7% unassisted. Joel Embiid still up there as well, 60% unassisted. So.
Okay, so when we talk about assisted versus unassisted, for your viewers out there, what we're really talking about is who generated the offense for who, right? So Joel Embiid is a smarter player, in my opinion, a considerably smarter player than Pascal Siakam, even though I have so many complaints about his shot selection from game to game where he should dominate the post, but he settles for mid-range jump shots. Embiid is a smart guy. He plays off of other players. So he allows Simmons to create looks for him. He allows Seth Curry to create looks for him. Siakam is a more ball dominant ISO type of player. So when you're saying that a guy is scoring unassisted, what you're really saying is he's scoring off away from a pass. So I'll give you an example. So let's say Pascal Siakam dribbles the ball up the court like he did 2 games ago, and then he just decides to launch a 3 out of nowhere. That's an unassisted shot, right?
Yeah, it is.
Right. If Pascal Siakam gets the ball on the block and he holds it for 5 seconds and then he tries to dribble and make a layup, that's an unassisted shot. How is that positive?
That's positive because you're asking one of these players to get you a basket. Robert, here's the thing. Hold on. I want to let you get, but the shocking part about this, and this blew my mind too. Less than 5 feet. Joel Embiid is so dominant. And like you said, it could be, you actually said he's smarter than Pascal Siakam. I would argue less. He has some questionable shot selections. 5 feet from the from the rim. He's shooting, or he's 40% of his field goals made are unassisted, which tells you that he's relying on others to get him points in a way. When you look at it that way,
how is that a bad thing? That's a great thing. That's a great thing. What are we talking about here?
Because you want one of these players.
I'm going crazy here. Like, okay, I'm gonna make a point here. Okay, if a guy, I want to draw you a little point here.
Right.
If Pascal Siakam is wide open underneath the basket,
right,
and Fred VanVleet passes him the ball, then Pascal Siakam chose to be underneath the basket, which shows his off-ball movement, which is a smart play. Now, according to what you're saying, it would be smart for Pascal Siakam to wait 6 seconds underneath the basket, even though he'd catch a 3-second violation, and then shoot so that it could be unassisted.
But you're assuming
good.
You're assuming he stood there for 6 seconds. That's making up a scenario. That's not necessarily the case. That's the point here is that you give one of these guys the ball. Who's going to get you a basket that's unassisted? So you can look at it in both views. Robert, we're not talking about who's
10% better. He's 10% better in terms of efficiency, and he takes more threes. The comparison is not even close. I just want to throw this out for viewers out there. Pascal Siakam last year, 17.7 PER. Joel Embiid, 30.3. Okay. Pascal Siakam had 0.10 win shares. Joel Embiid, 0.26. Pascal Siakam was a 0.04 blocks plus minus. Joel Embiid was one of the top players in the league at 7.2. Dude, this isn't close. I think we should move on to Julius Randle. It's a little bit closer. I could actually make a point that you might be kind of closer on Julius Randle, but with Joel Embiid, you're talking about a top 5 player, top 6 player in the NBA, an MVP candidate. You're talking about the second best center in the NBA. And you're comparing him to a guy that frankly, oh my God, it's not even close. It's not.
Robert, here's the thing. There's no denying that the overall player, yes, Joel Embiid is better than Pascal Siakam. He's more dominant. But if you're asking for someone to get a basket, that's Pascal Siakam. Joel Embiid was held to a big 0 last season by the Raptors, or I believe that was the season before. But he was held to 0 points for someone who's that dominant. And you say he's a smarter player apparently than Pascal Siakam. He has a lot of questionable decisions as well. We saw that throughout the series versus the 76ers. That 76ers team, you could argue, was more talented than the Raptors. They had Jimmy Butler. They had Ben Simmons. They had Tobias Harris. They had another JJ Redick, 3-point specialist as well. They had some really good players. And I still argue to this day, if the Raptors were not in the playoffs or if they were in another conference, I think the 76ers make the finals. That's how good that team was. Yet, Joel Embiid struggled mightily. Yes, Marc Gasol was absolutely dominant on the defensive side. But Joel Embiid, someone who's supposed to be that dominant, is giving you, inconsistent play. He's giving you 0 points, 0 points, 0 points in a regular season game. So look, he's a more dominant player. Yes. Is he the better overall player? Yes, he is. But his intelligence isn't there. I'd argue that with you. If he's smarter than
I wouldn't argue that with anybody, dude. We're talking 44 points per 100 possessions. You keep talking about 0 points, 0 points. The guy scores 44 points per 100 possessions. Pascal Siakam scores 28. He's one of the best scorers in the NBA. You can't judge a guy for having 1 bad game or 2 bad games, okay? I'm telling you right now, Gasol is one of the best post defenders in NBA history, okay?
There's no doubt about
gassing it. He's a former defensive player of the year. Nick Nurse is one of the best defensive coaches ever, okay? Not gassing. They stopped Giannis. Giannis became an MVP next year, okay? I think he was MVP that year, and he became a champion, I think, 2 years later. So, look, I'm not saying that Joel Embiid's a perfect player. He takes way too many jump shots for my liking. If he was in the post more often and he had more of an assertive personality, honestly, he could score friggin' 40 points a game in the NBA. Okay. What I'm trying to say is that there has to be some sort of balance and nuance, man. Like when you're comparing, I want to share with you an insight. When you tell me that we're talking about Pascal Siakam versus Joel Embiid, honestly, it feels to me like comparing Michael Jordan to Mitch Richmond. It's so far.
So you're saying
far.
No way,
dude.
Joel Embiid can't even stay on the floor, man. Come on, Robert.
What are we talking about, man?
We're talking about everything here. We're talking about intelligence. This guy has not taken care of it. He has not taken care of his body at all. He's not a smart, intelligent player. He's not smarter than Pascal Siakam.
Okay, come on, man. You're better than this. You know that guys who are 7 foot tall, 7'1", they have a lot of injury issues. You know that, right?
That's different.
Did Arvydas Sabonis not take care of his body? Did Bill Laimbeer not take care of his body? Obviously, sorry, not Bill Laimbeer. Bill Walton not take care of his body. Obviously, there are bigger players. They do break down a little bit more. I understand that. You can make an argument. We're not arguing whether Joel Embiid is more durable. We're arguing if he's a better first option, and he is definitively, for me, a better first option. Julius Randle, I think if you move on to the Knicks, if we can move on to that, I think you have a better. Okay, go ahead.
Just one point here. I'm not talking about, Robert, when we talk about taking care of your body, I'm not talking about injuries. Of course, bigger men, we know they're going to have knee issues, feet issues. We saw that with every pretty much dominant player, every big man in the history of the NBA. But when you talk about Bill Walton and some of the other guys, those were different decades. They were different eras. Those 20, 30, 40 plus years ago. And you're talking about Joel Embiid, who has the resources, who has the nutritional value. You see this guy munching on cheeseburgers before the start of the match. You see him in practice on his phone, watching anime and sipping on milkshakes or burgers. And there was some story out there that someone told me last season. Apparently, I can't remember the exact player. But someone said every time we'd be on the road, Joel Embiid would have 2 milkshakes every single time I'd buy him. So look, his body is going to break down, yes, but he is just not taking care of his body, nutritional wise.
Sure. And you know what? This is an argument that was made against Vince Carter when he was a Raptor, where they said people just, he just didn't take care of his body. And then he ended up having a 23 season career and longest career in NBA history. And no one could have predicted that was going to happen in 2003. So maybe Joel Embiid will mature. Look, I'm not arguing whether Joel Embiid is a really mature guy. Obviously, I think he's super immature. I think he has mental lapses. I think he takes games off. All of that being said, at his even okay, so Joel Embiid out of shape, Joel Embiid being super immature, Joel Embiid, taking occasional games off and just standing in the mid post and taking in fadeaway twos is still twice the player Pascal Siakam is trying his best. The talent gap between these two, I listened to a podcast called Athletic Alchemy. It's a Warriors podcast. And they because of all the hype about, will Pascal Siakam be traded to the Warriors, they started to dig in a little bit more. And I don't particularly agree with this name, but they call him Small Bag. They call him Small Bag Siakam because he really doesn't have a counter to that spin. And he hasn't figured it out yet. And I think what you realize is that when defenses really caught on to him, to point to what you said about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, there really wasn't a hell of a lot he could do. But with Joel Embiid, he has a counter to a counter to a counter to a counter. This is one of the most elite big men in NBA history. His footwork is so unstoppable. You can't stop this guy one-on-one. Gasol couldn't stop him one-on-one. Today, prime Gasol couldn't stop this guy one-on-one. Even the Raptors had to throw a second defender on him. So often you had Danny Green or Kawhi Leonard shading down on him, forcing him to give up the ball. And of course, you had Ben Simmons who couldn't hit a jump shot, and the Sixers, offense was spacing issues. So I would just argue he hasn't been in the right offense yet. But even in the wrong offense, he's been twice the player Siakam has been.
Yeah, I'm not arguing about that. Joel Embiid is definitely the better player overall. That's why I put him under the maybe. Again, we've talked about the points. We can always ask you guys in the comment section, but let's talk about Julius Randle. Now, this one, there's a lot of Raptors fans last season saying this is what Pascal Siakam should have been when they talk about Julius Randle. Now, we know he won the most improved player of the year. I'd actually done a video, and then we saw what he did against the playoffs. Again, that's why I have the Knicks as a maybe, because their styles of play are similar. I think Julius Randle is a little bit more dominant because of his size and his speed. The combination of his size, he's able to bully people a little bit more than Pascal is. That's why I had the Knicks under a maybe. Again, they have some really good players surrounding Julius Randle, but obviously Julius Randle is the main player I want to talk about. So You could make the argument. Again, it's a maybe. It's a maybe for sure. I wouldn't say for 100% sure he'd be the first option there, but
statistically, he's a better player in every single category. Okay, per 100, he scores more points, has more assists, better true shooting percentage, better box plus minus, better win shares, better PER. He's literally better across the board. What I'll say is that Julius Randle had a career year last year. This is not the player Julius Randle has been for most of his career. So I would say every player can have one good year in a different system, right? The Knicks were pretty offensively deprived, and I think we saw that. I think the addition of Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier is going to open him up a little bit more. I will argue that here you have a point. I would, if I was offered Julius Randle for Pascal Siakam, I would say yes, only because Julius Randle makes less money. I don't remember the new contract, if he signed a new contract, but if his new contract,
I believe he did.
So if his new contract is equivalent to Pascal Siakam, then I would say no. And the reason I would say no is not because I don't think that Julius Randle is a more talented offensive player, because he definitely is a more talented offensive player. I think Siakam gives you more of a versatility player type on defense than Randle does. In terms of offense, I think they're both miscast as first options. I think last year we saw this with Jeremy Grant in Detroit and Christian Wood in Houston, right? Big numbers, guys, right? But it's like, man, once defense gear in on these guys, they don't have the counters, they don't have the moves to make it. And when the floor shrinks and when the offense comes to a crawl, you start to see the holes in players' games. And then there are guys like Luka Doncic and Joel Embiid and less so Giannis, but like Jokic and Harden and Durant, where they have a counter to a counter to a counter, what I said. But guys like Randle, they don't have a counter to a counter to a counter. They can't score over 2-3 guys. They're not cerebral enough. But again, it's very difficult for me to argue that Siakam's a better player than Randle, other than on defense. Offensively, I think Randle presents a much bigger post threat, but Siakam presents a better rim running threat. I would argue in an ideal system, they're both second or third options, and Siakam's probably a better third option than Randle is. So I like him more than Randle, but I don't like him more as a first option.
Yeah. No, that's, again, that one's debatable. I actually think Julius Randle, now you talked about, it's funny because the whole discussion has been where I think Pascal would be the number one option, but I actually do think you talked about Julius Randle didn't have a counter. I think it was, I wouldn't say they did, the Atlanta Hawks, I wouldn't say they did similar things to Julius Randle as the Boston Celtics did to Pascal. But I do believe, again, I hate to sound like I'm making excuses for Pascal. It would have been nice. Ultimately, you're right, bro, Robert. It is up to a player to take care of his body. They are professional players that get paid millions of dollars. But if you're personally asking me, it would have been nice to see peak Pascal. And when I mean peak Pascal, I mean that's pre-COVID Pascal against the Boston Celtics. That would have been fun. Now, again, maybe we can look up the numbers another day of how
I think we would have been a finals team that year. I think that's what Raptors fans are so pissed off about, is because when you really look up and down the roster, OG Anunoby is balling out of his mind. Gasol was giving you everything he had on the last legs of his NBA career. Serge Ibaka was doing well. Kyle Lowry was still there. Fred VanVleet was playing well. And you're like, man, this one guy who keeps going 4 for 17, 4 for 18 from the floor, and they keep giving him the ball and they don't go away from him because Nurse has this sort of hard-headed approach to, you know, my guy is my guy is my guy always, no matter what, like he did with Fred VanVleet in the playoffs in a championship run. And it's like, shoot, if he just doesn't play and you play freaking Rondé Hollis Jefferson over him, I think you win that series over the Celtics. I really do. Dude, it's about the Helio.
No, don't get me wrong, Robert. I'm not disagreeing with you. Pascal absolutely struggled. There's no way in hell I'm trying to defend that series. He was downright awful, but he still was decent. Series. He was still really decent on defense though.
Against the Boston Celtics. People always say that, but those people don't realize how good Rondé Hollis Jefferson was on defense.
Oh no, Rondé Hollis was really solid. I remember him that season as well.
But he wasn't a spacer on offense. Yeah. But I would argue if you run a heliocentric or post-centric offense through Pascal Siakam, he's not a spacer on offense either. So basically one guy is taking shots and not making them, and the other guy is not taking shots and making other guys' shots harder because he's not spacing properly. And I would argue that I would rather a guy screw up other people by about 5% than shoot 20% himself. So I just think that it would have been an opportunity. At the time, I don't think that Kyle Lowry or OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam, or I don't think anyone on this team was really capable of being a first option. Siakam at that point 2 years ago had the best shot of being that type of player, maybe like an ISO Joe for the Atlanta Hawks, if you remember that team.
I remember.
That's that team that just exactly. I mean, Joe Johnson's not a superstar. Al Horford's not a superstar, but they're just like
a really good team.
They're a really good team because they move the ball. But then they didn't win a championship. They didn't even get close. They didn't make it to the finals. Why? All those 60-win seasons don't go anywhere without a superstar. So
that's true.
I understand that the Raptors really do like to go ISO in the post and ISO in the mid post, etc. But at the end of the day, like Siakam didn't show up that series. I'll argue if he plays as well as he did to start the season in the playoffs, which again is sort of a stupid thing to say for me, because who can play as well in the playoffs as they did in the first 3 weeks of the season? So I think honestly what happened is, you'll notice this every single year. There are certain players who get off to really hot starts because they have really active summers. You'll see a lot of this with guys who come off of Olympic runs. Yeah. They just start out the season completely bonkers and then they taper off, when the energy sort of runs out. Because really what happens is a lot of NBA players is not something that people admit, but I know a few NBA players who just say, honestly, I play myself into shape by Christmas. Yeah. And they just do. And so if you can catch these guys napping in the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you can put up some huge numbers, and that's what Siakam did. But I have never really seen him for a consistent stretch. We've talked about 13-game Bargnani. Right. We've talked about 6-game OG, right? We've seen small stretches in certain situations where a guy has gone completely bonkers. So I don't know why people always allude to like the first 20 games of Siakam, because he wasn't good after he came back from the groin injury at all. Right. And he kind of tapered off after that. So he really had like a good month and a half.
I would argue it was a little bit longer, but again, I'd have to go back and look into it.
Yeah, we'll check it out. Yeah. It was about, I think it was maximum 2 months. I remember, it was like 25, 26 points per game. People were like, oh my God, this guy's like a top 10 player. Yeah. It's insane. He's doing so well. He was shooting decent, but it hasn't come back at all since.
Robert, I will say this though, before we end this podcast or this video, I should say, but it is, NBA fans are the worst at doing this. So we've seen this through every single team fan base. Every time a player plays well, this guy's a superstar. He's an all-star. He's going to be our future. And NBA fans have a habit of doing that. We've seen this with, this up and down season with the Raptors, when Fred plays well, when Fred struggles, when OG plays well, when it's bias recency, as I like to call it. But yeah, I absolutely agree. I think fans always do overhype players, or especially your own team's players a little bit.
I think it's part of the beauty of being a fan. This guy sucks. This guy's the best. Run him out of town. And to all the other teams that you had listed, which included, some of the younger teams like the Cavs, like the Detroit Pistons, where maybe there isn't a clear definitive option that's actually a better player. I would just argue the Detroit Pistons have a lot riding on Cade Cunningham. They're not going to let anybody be a first option over that guy, even though he shoots 27%, 30%. It doesn't really matter to them. I would argue the Magic are probably in a similar situation with Suggs and Cole Anthony. They're not going to, they're a rebuilding team. The only team that I will 100% agree that he could be a first option on would be the Spurs. The San Antonio Spurs would probably run an offense between him and DeJounte Murray. And I think that they would. I think they would do that because last year they showed that they were willing to run an offense through DeMar DeRozan. If you're willing to run an offense through DeMar DeRozan, I think Siakam's similar in that sense.
So, well, again, I'll disagree on the Magic and Pistons. I don't think they would have a player like Pascal to begin with if they were rebuilding and they wanted to obviously focus on their younger players. But, just hypothetically speaking, if they did have
I like Jonathan Isaac more than I like Siakam if they're both healthy. 100%.
Wow. All right.
I think he's a defensive player of the year for sure. He's one of the best defenders. Pascal,
I know that obviously the Raptors were the better team in, the championship run. Didn't Pascal really go at
he had a good game against them.
He had a really good series against, he took that personally.
Yeah, but the reason he took that personally is because Isaac had shot him down several times before.
No, I'm not arguing that. He's a solid defender, but I don't know if I'd take him over Pascal. But
he's coming off 2 injuries, so I have no idea how he would fare. But I think the Magic are really big on him. He's a younger player. He's got more athletic upside. I don't think he's got the same offensive upside, but I don't think he's that type of player. And again, like with young rebuilding teams, you'll always see that they will put their veterans kind of on ice and then just say, okay, you either be a mentor or we're going to buy you out. Right. Yeah, Siakam is at that point right now as a 27-year-old where he's more viewed as a veteran player, not as a upside player. This is kind of an expected thing in the NBA that by 26, 27, we kind of know what kind of player you are. And I think for 2 years, so unless he comes out healthy this season and starts averaging like 25 points per game and the Raptors are like a 60-win team, there's really not a lot he can do to rehab his value, in my opinion, from where it's currently at.
Yeah, I do think with Pascal, though, I know we're going a little bit off topic here, but I do think with Pascal, I think with him, he needs to realize that the roster is better and there's players around him that can really get their own. And he needs to realize that he needs to play a little bit more passing, and he doesn't always have to be that guy who's always going to get you points. He needs to focus a little bit on other players as well. That's what I will say to end this video.
Yeah, it's, Barnes and OG are really underpaid. For what they provide, they're extremely underpaid. The combined total for both those guys is about 25 million a year. I would argue they provide about 50 million of value. So with Siakam and those two guys, you actually have three players, if you lump their salaries together, which provide excellent value at 60 million. That's an amazing front court for $60 million, even though one guy is overpaid and two guys are underpaid. So it can work. The only way it doesn't work is when you try to run the offense through the guy that you paid the most money to, because it's like it's a double down fallacy, right? You're kind of justifying the fact that you paid the guy. But I think what Scotty Barnes has become already, I mean, I looked up a stat today where he said no rookie in the last 30 years.
I saw that.
Shaq, right? Shaquille O'Neal.
Shaq.
And I've compared his numbers in the first 10 games to LeBron, to Grant Hill. He stacks up, man. He stacks up. Like, his role on offense isn't the same as LeBron's. LeBron was... It's crazy how good he's been at 20. So I think that how good he's been, I think the Raptors know this, because if everyone in the league knows this, they definitely know this. And I think this accelerates your timeline. And what Brian Windhorst said, I completely agree. I don't usually agree with Brian Windhorst, but he said everything that the Raptors do from here on out has to be geared towards Scotty's timeline. So if Pascal Siakam is going to be 30 years old by the time Scotty Barnes hits his prime, this might be a good time to move off of Pascal Siakam. Same thing with Fred, same thing with Boucher, same thing with Dragic, all these guys. Because what you have here is a budding superstar. I believe that within 20, 30 games, it'll be pretty obvious who the number one option on this team should be.
All right, we'll leave it at that. We'll maybe make that into another topic of itself once we get more into the season. It'll be obviously exciting to see Scotty Barnes progress, and as well as OG Anunoby, and just how well the team does. Hopefully, how well the team does with Pascal and all the guys back. Obviously, you want everyone healthy. So we'll see how the season progresses for the Raptors. Where Robert, thank you for being here. It's always fun debating with you. You got a lot of stats just like me. You really like to take a deep dive into stats as well, and just really talk about the analytics, which is always so much fun to talk to. So thank you for being here.
I appreciate it so much. And to everyone in the comments, please keep the comments super respectful. Don't want to hear any Pascal or any name calling about Pascal Siakam. If you're a fan, if you're not a fan, whatever, let's keep the comments to basketball. I've seen too many comments sections about Pascal Siakam that just make my heart hurt. So yeah, like, I'm not a huge guy on him as a player, but it doesn't mean that I don't love the guy as a person. He's an awesome person. So
absolutely,
keep it at that.
Absolutely. All right, guys, make sure to like this video, subscribe. And as I said, make sure to subscribe to Robert's channel as well. I'll leave it in the comment section, and that will be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.
See you, man.